Yo, what's going on, guys, and welcome to another video. It's been a while, but in today's video I want to specifically talk about Battlefield. So before I do anything, I want to preface this video by saying I somewhat have a guilty pleasure playing this game. 2042 for me is a competent game, albeit a very mediocre one at best, and I play the game quite a bit. I have over 100 hours, 150 hours I think around this point, although part of that reason is just because Modern Warfare 2 isn't out yet, and this game is basically served as a gap game while I wait for that release. Regardless of what I think, though, I think it's no surprise that regardless of the updates Battlefield 24 has received, the game really hasn't massively changed to the point where most of the community would consider good. Sure, there's a bunch of bug fixes and stuff, but the fact that we are almost 2 to 3 months away from year 2, we are literally almost done with year 1 of this game, and we've literally only had one map, 2 new weapons, and a couple of base map redesigns, which honestly shouldn't have happened in the first place, is for lack of a better term, absolutely embarrassing and pathetic, but we'll get to that point. Now, I initially wanted to do a 1 year in review video, but after seeing this video by Chopper, go subscribe to him by the way, he's a really awesome YouTuber if you like Call of Duty Zombies, and he did basically an autopsy view specifically on Vanguard Zombies. I guess the roadmap of Vanguard Zombies almost feels a lot like Battlefield 2042, from the triple development to the release to the hype. It's kind of strange how similar these games are, and especially since they basically released within the same time frames. I think it would be more interesting, rather than giving a review, a year in review, I think it would be interesting to observe more so what happened with this game and why do so many people dismiss this game as one of the worst, if not the worst, entries in the franchise, and basically the game that almost killed off DICE's entire reputation, in my opinion. So without further ado, let's get into it. So let's first start at the game's reveal. After the mess that was Battlefield 5's reveal, people have been praying for a full return to a modern setting and simple Battlefield fun that games like Bad Company 2, Battlefield 3, and Battlefield 4 had, which were considered by many as the magical peak of the franchise. A lot of the heart of Battlefield's community, and frankly the game itself, was its sandbox approach to FPS multiplayer gameplay. For example, using C4 on EOD bots, putting an explosive on a tank and then launching into the sky and then shooting a jet midair, and of course the beloved rendezvous. Really, the creativity here is what made Battlefield unique from other games in its genre, and something that honestly that has been lacking quite a bit in the latter historical mainline entries, Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5. As such, it made sense for DICE for their next game to focus their marketing on this mentality, and it worked spectacularly. The reveal trailer showed the wacky, crazy fun aspects in previous games, and even made a CGI remake of the rendezvous, which I was not expecting. I have never seen the community so hyped and excited for a mainline Battlefield title that promised a return to form per se. It attracted so much attention, and I absolutely must give the marketing team credit here, as it seems that they absolutely understood how to make old and new fans invigorated for a new game in a single trailer. In retrospect though, it's hilariously polarizing to see the early trailers knowing the true nature of the game itself. The fact that this game by the higher-ups was progressing well and on schedule were probably two of the biggest face-flat lies that I've heard in gaming over the past couple of years. And that really was the first domino to the entire effect. E3 and EA Play arrived shortly after, showing pre-alpha gameplay of the game, with all these like super cool battles, super chaotic battles, tons of players fighting in a dense urban area, with storms brewing, explosions happening, all the action. Which was kind of funny because that we know now that the gameplay provided was just a small area of Hourglass. Later on, Portal was revealed, which was touted as a love letter to fans, and showing this insane concept of making custom game types with content across current and past Battlefield titles. Server browser, free dedicated servers, logic editor, all the bells and whistles that you want for a custom game mode. In concept, this was really a love letter, and it sparked so much speculation and creativity in the possibilities of what was possible in this new mode. Of course, there were some limitations, but overall, the concept was incredibly well received and even got fans not too keen on normal 2042 gameplay to give it a go, as the mentality of they could just simply make a portal server akin to the early games if they didn't like it. And Hazard Zone was, well, something. I don't know, I didn't play a lot, so not a lot of Hazard Zone will be in this review. All of these trailers scream nostalgia, and to its credit, it ended up keeping fans hooked up right until the beta. While it was always good to attract players in by making them remember of times of old, with a new eye now, it's very apparent that they were hiding a lot of the technical state of the game and any new content outside of specialists and parts of maps. It all looked extremely artificial and deceiving, as most of the trailer's best parts were really just tailored specifically to small portions of the map and had people condensed, like everyone condensed in a single location, which is not how the actual game plays. That deception is what hooked players into being excited for the game, to a point where we were less picky over some of the more drastic changes and willing to try anything because we had a setting back and it looked like it would be good for the game. Hey, big side note here. To clarify this point, the controversy around specialists at the time was more on visuals of the specialists rather than actual gameplay implications at the time, at least from what I saw. Feel free to comment otherwise, but from what I remembered, a lot of it was mainly just the appearance of the specialists. I'm not saying that there wasn't any controversy at all. It's just that the controversy was surrounding it mainly was revolving around different areas and not really about gameplay at the time, if that makes any sense. Now, to be absolutely clear here, it is hard to give the community a lot of fault here, as we've never seen features like universal gadgets, the plus system, and specialists in a Battlefield game before, so it's hard to make comparisons at the time on how it would work in comparison against legacy features. I just want to make context of how I think the marketing team essentially blindsided the community into thinking they were getting a return to form rather than an entirely different experience. It really wasn't until the beta when people started to realize the cracks of the game, which was so close to the launch that hype couldn't lower except down to keep the perceived image in check. I gotta be honest, the beta was straight bad. Nowadays, games use betas as glorified marketing strategy of demoing games and getting people's interest in it. However, 2042 is really the first beta in a recent memory that I, and a lot of other players for that matter, thought that the beta felt like an actual beta. Tons of visual bugs and glitches, soldiers stretching around corners and a bunch of visual glitches, unfinished HUDs and menus, and unacceptable optimization and performance on the PC when the game did not look any better than previous entries in a lot of the community's eyes. At least these cases were issues that could be fixed in due time. Now, should these have been polished beforehand? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. But at the very least, they can be somewhat addressed in a timely fashion in the future. These issues, however, are just part of the complaints people had with the beta. A lot of the criticism came from the core gameplay loop and map design, and unlike bugs, these areas can't be changed simply, and it may take weeks, even months, to get some sort of redesign, if at all. Speaking of these features, let's talk about everything that changed about 2042. Battlefield 2042 did massive formulaic changes to its core gameplay loop, both for better and for worse. It's much more drastic than in previous games such as Battlefield 5 and Battlefield 1. The core all-out war experience experienced some of the most polarizing changes the series has ever seen, and essentially we're going to go over some of the major changes in different sections. A core part of the Battlefield experience for many is the teamwork-based gameplay that, in part due, was how the class system worked. In previous titles, weapons, gadgets, and more were locked down behind essentially different archetypes per se, which each fulfills a specific purpose. Balance was done in a sense as a result, as you couldn't simply run all of the best things at once. However, in 2042, DICE wanted to rework the class system to be more free-form of choice and allow tons of customization and combinations, and thus introduced stuff like the plus system for weapons and the specialist system for the soldiers. I want to quickly touch on the plus system for attachments first. I actually really like this feature, allowing for flexibility and allowing you to essentially carry 2 to 3 extra guns in a way without requiring you to respawn. The attachments themselves were relatively almost pointless at the beginning of the game's life, But in its current state, each attachment actually somewhat gives you a distinct trait that can cater to a specific engagement and playstyle with some easy button switches. It allows you to be nimble and ready for almost any situation thrown at you, which I actually really enjoy. While I do agree that it somewhat throws some balance out the window for weapons, the overall concept, I believe, is not egregious nor negatively impacts the gameplay in a way that's not fun. I think with a couple of tweaks, this system can easily be implemented in future Battlefield titles and be loved, but of course you're free to disagree on that. While the plus system, in my opinion, wasn't too egregious, I can't really say the same thing for the specialist system, however. In this game, specialists give different characters a specific ability and trait to aid in battle, such as a stim pistol or a drone. However, weapons and gadgets were universal, meaning that anyone could equip basically anything, allowing players to use any available weapon and gadget combination as they please to aid their playstyle. While this sounds great on paper, I mean, Call of Duty does the same thing and it works perfectly there, the truth of the matter here is that DICE was trying to fix a problem that never existed anyway. No one really complained about the class system in the past, and the old class system actually had some major merits. See, for example, in Battlefield 4, the AEK absolutely dominated the meta. However, you could not also top yourself with ammo or carry a rocket launcher with you to essentially also become an anti-vehicle player to dominate both infantry and vehicles. You were restricted to simply supplying health and a couple of other things and had to rely on teammates for ammo pickups. It was a balancing act and promotes playing the roles of the classes by choosing weapons to a specific class. So for example, playing with SMGs in Battlefield 4 because you love the weapon class encouraged you somewhat to also try to take out vehicles because you had a bunch of anti-vehicle options to choose from in gadgets, and they were basically in your back pocket that you were essentially forced to run with because you couldn't equip anything else. You were inclined to use them because it never hurt you to do so, because you just had them anyway. The game forced you to have them. I think that was the magic with the class system. Its restricted nature actually improves the gameplay experience and promotes team play in a way that also didn't rely on stuff like voice communication, which was extremely special and something that I don't think can be replicated in other games. With specialists, however, the balance between infantry completely breaks down here. Let's say we start with Falk, yes. She has a med stim pistol that can easily heal herself, which is extremely powerful, not requiring her to run a medic bag for health. I can then equip something like the BSVM, which in its prime completely dominated its meta, along with an ammo pack to easily resupply on ammo. I can also bring in sensor grenades to essentially spot everyone in my path, and I don't have to rely on a recon to spot. I'm basically a one-man infantry machine with ammo and health constantly to keep me topped up, and proximity sensors to keep me constantly aware of my surroundings. Now, this is just one combination I could do, but this is a massive balancing issue because it completely takes away a core sense of teamwork in the loop. Rather than having players be forced to a specific playstyle, allowing players to equip whatever they choose, they're inclined mainly more so to do more selfish builds in nature compared to other builds that are mainly designed for teamwork and roleplay. Engineers like Irish don't need to equip rocket launchers, they can equip an armor plate for themselves, which one really doesn't make sense. The engineer's role really is supposed to be anti-vehicle and support, or repairing vehicle support, not, armor plating themselves up. I don't know about that. But also makes it so that inherently there are going to be less players to play these specific roles since they can equip anything they want. As a result, balance between certain parts of the game go completely out the window. We can easily say this with vehicles, right? When no one really runs a rocket launcher because they don't want to run a rocket launcher, and it takes 3 rockets to destroy a hovercraft at the game's launch, that's a problem. Combined with the open maps, which we will go into later, I remember numerous times going to multiple kill streaks on hovercraft and bolts with absolutely no worries at all against anti-infantry, simply because no one actually ran the anti-vehicle gadgets for the most part. This change alone takes away so much of the core gameplay loop that made it Battlefield. Now, in a vacuum, is it fun? Somewhat, but we're talking about in the context of the past games. While I applaud DICE's efforts for attempting something a little fresh and something new, the current implementation does not suit a Battlefield game and completely needs an overhaul to better align values of teamwork and with freedom. Cough, cough. Literally, as I was making this video, they just announced the specialist rework. What do you know? So I mentioned before that vehicles completely dominate this game's meta for the most part, and that's partially because of the map design of the base map. So let's go into the core problem, which is the ways that DICE had to go around the increased player count. One of the highlights of this game was double the player count, 128 players compared to 64 in previous games. While that sounded cool on paper, its execution in this game was subpar at best and infuriating at worst, and that's mainly due to how the maps and multiple other areas of the game were designed to accommodate the new player counts. Now, in previous games, each point of interest or capture point were for the most part well designed with ample cover that allowed both infantry and vehicles to get from point A to point B without much issue. In this game, obviously though, with a higher player count, you would want to increase the map size to accommodate the flow so it plays very well. It would be kind of strange playing a 64 player designed map with 128 players. It would just be chaos. They specifically stated that their idea in this game is to split the maps into smaller sections, smaller battles, where players could fight over mini battles in a way. That's why the sectors have multiple flags that you can take, because they treat that as its own little mini battlefield. While in concept this sounds good, the execution here was very poor for the base maps. Rather than evolving really previous map designs and philosophies to a wider player count, it seems really that they just took the 64 players, the 64 player versions of maps, stretched all the points of interest out, and literally filled up the empty pieces with almost nothingness. Now, this causes some major issues for infantry. With so much open area to traverse to, players really cannot travel efficiently without being easy targets for vehicles and snipers. The lack of cover issue even extends to some of the capture points as well, surprisingly. Hourglass, Breakaway, Kaleidoscope, pre-rework, some of the worst offenders of this. Points like B1 on Hourglass and C point on the OG Kaleidoscope were awful to capture unless you were in an attack vehicle for the most part. It was honestly baffling how open and empty the map design is in this game. Heck, Orbital, the beta map, was criticized for its open spaces, but actually ended up being one of the better designed maps simply because it had a little bit more cover compared to some of the other 2042 maps. The breakthrough versions really weren't at much better. Sectors were either too spread out, such as Kaleidoscope A, which was basically almost impossible to capture the second sector after the first one, or way too chaotic and almost impossible to capture, especially on skyscraper points, which they thankfully patched, but it was still chaotic. Think like the Hourglass final sector at launch. Along with this, aesthetically, the maps don't really fit the war-torn setting the game's narrative is pushing for. Maps are extremely clean without really much anything. It doesn't even feel like there was a war that happened there. Almost feels like you're playing Minecraft creative mode, honestly, when you start off. So I'm going to put my tinfoil hat here, so you're free to disregard this point at all. But one reason why I think the maps are lackluster in detail is to keep performance in check. I mean, I don't think it needs to be said again. 2042 surprisingly has poor performance on 128 modes considering its visual fidelity compared to previous games. Playing this game really on, because I don't even, guys, I don't have bad hardware. I have a 3070 Ti, and the game only gets around 60 to 70 FPS on 1440p medium, where in previous games I usually got about 100, 120 on a bunch of the modes on high settings. However, playing low player counts significantly improved performance to the point where it was up to par with previous titles. Like playing 32 player Rush, I got around 130, 140 FPS, no issues with the exact same settings. Now, I know it's unfair to compare previous games' performance. You expect the new one to be more demanding, but this is kind of unacceptable considering how, I guess, bad, in my opinion, the game looks visually compared to the previous games, especially Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5. Those games look absolutely spectacular compared to this. I think this correlation kind of tells me that the player count really taxes the PCs to a point where DICE can't really add more effects or details to maps that would, further hinder frame rates. I don't blame them, but I think that this game really needs some help with optimization or to accommodate bigger and more actual good maps, I guess you could say. Now, to make sure that the point is clear, right? I don't hate the concept of 128 players, and the idea of having 128 players is not bad. I mean, Battlefield 2 has 128 players as a mod, I believe, and apparently it runs fine and plays great. But in fact, I think it's DICE's compromises to map design and performance that make players conceive the increased player count as a massive downgrade compared to previous titles. The map design suffers so much that it prevents the 128 concept to really shine. In fact, it got so bad that DICE is now really only making 64 player focused maps now, and they ended up scrapping Breakthrough 128, which really sucks. I miss the chaos sometimes. And I see a lot of potential here for 128, but here it's so poorly executed that it may be best for them to play it safe for future titles, which really sucks because I think this 128 player mode can definitely flourish in future games if done correctly. So there's a couple of little things. I'm going to put this in rapid fire, so bang, 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 let's do it. No profile or scoreboard for the first few months. I remember Infinite Warfare not having leaderboards and the combat record at launch, and we basically memed it to death. Honestly, it feels like deja vu, I guess. Visual animations and effects. They look extremely robotic compared to previous titles. It's more of an irk thing since I've seen great animation work from games like Modern Warfare, but it feels wrong, especially compared to Battlefield 5, which had amazing and great animation quality. Only 4 spots for game modes on the menu. I don't get this part at all. AI bots. Now, this is a bigger feature that is up for debate, but to be honest, I don't really have a issue with the bots in multiplayer, although I know a lot of people don't like the sense of killing non-human players. Also, they're running the original legacy class system, so kind of stings when you realize that you're running the basically inferior system here. They aren't overly offensive though compared to other issues. Matchmaking. In this game, unlike in previous games, you can't go to a server browser and find the specific server that you want. You have to go into a matchmaking system, which kind of sucks. I think both can exist in All Out Warfare though, where you can either quick match if you're just lazy and don't want to do anything, or you can just join one via a server browser if you want to find a specific game mode. I don't understand why we can only have one and not both, especially when the server browser is literally in Portal. Overall, the All Out Warfare experience is pretty mix of good and a lot of eh. There's some key issues that DICE need to figure out for their next title, and I hope they learn something from this game for future titles. Now, obviously, this isn't the only mode. There's also Hazard Zone and Portal. Now, I want to make this clear, I will not cover Hazard Zone as I only touched the game mode once, but from what I've played and what I've seen, it's simply a nothing burger, and the low player count will show that. Really, no one talks or plays Hazard Zone. It's an unfinished and pointless game mode that is locked behind a paywall of paying for 2042 that really doesn't innovate at all in the extraction genre, such as Escape from Tarkov, so I'm not going to cover this mode in detail. I don't think that it deserves any love or attention. While Hazard Zone is a nothing burger, Portal is a little bit different than that, so let's go into Portal. Now, nitpicks aside like animations, the Portal content actually alleviates a good portion of the main issues in the base game, and I think Portal from a concept is pretty cool. People were making some awesome and creative game modes that I've played, like Gun Game, Infected. Some cool, awesome things too, like a flying training simulator, which is awesome. That was one of my favorites. The Given Logic editor is really flexible and provides creators with a lot to play around with. However, despite the overall praise of this mode, Portal has somewhat been resorted to nothing really but to playtest DICE-made game modes for the current time. There's some key issues that I will go rather quickly as this video is getting pretty long. No persistent servers. With servers only existing if a player is in the server and nothing persists, so the server will die if no one's in the server. Communities can't really build because you basically have to rely on someone getting on the server and someone actually having access to the code to launch the server. So you can't really build a community here, as it's not easy for players to just join in without the admins having the time to join in. XP farming. While DICE decided to leave XP progression enabled along with allowing control over AI in your server, at the game's launch, people abused the shit out of Portal and made XP farming lobbies day and night, where you could just continuously slay against easy AI bots with only knives and easily gain XP to get your mastery badges and to rank up. This was quickly patched out of the game, and for a couple months XP was limited to an extremely small amount of XP per month, like per hour, sorry, which basically was like what, 50 XP, and that basically killed the incentive for most players to play Portal. I mean, why waste time on joining a community made custom mode that gives little XP when you can just play the official DICE one that has absolutely no XP restrictions? In Portal, for the most part, all legacy content, weapons, and attachments are unlocked by default anyway. So really the only thing that is unlockable is base game experience and weapon leveling. Having that restricted essentially turns the entire concept of custom servers as simply a custom match without any rewards for playing it. Only recently have DICE started to introduce a reward progression system, but by now it's already too late. People have moved on from Portal. Now, there are some good modes that did come out of DICE's official modes for Portal. Rush, Infantry Conquest, and Legacy Conquest were so popular and loved that the latter was made its own game type in the base game called Exodus Conquest, while the former will be released permanently as a game mode in the future. However, these modes are simply just the 2042 gameplay on old maps, which to a lot of community plays much better than the normal game's counterparts. It's kind of a takeaway how different older maps feel and were designed in the new gameplay styles DICE made, and honestly made the game a lot more bearable for a lot of the community. It's really a shame how Portal turned out in the end. What was a fantastic idea and concept ended up being rather burdened by a lot of the restrictions outside of the experience that it ended up turning into basically a CTE Lite, where DICE tests game modes and rotates every once in a while that they can't add into the base game for some reason. That, coupled with the fact that this mode is tied under the 2042 name, means that it will be tied with this game likely in the future, and I don't want that. I think this idea should be expanded on in its own standalone experience, because there's so much potential here based on the creativity the community has made with this mode. It's a shame of what Battlefield 2042 is right now. To start off this part, I want to ask, what games are a live service? You may look at successful ones like Fortnite or a failed one like Anthem, but by and large the term live service refers to a game that is consistently fed support and content that incentivizes players to continue playing past the launch. Let's give Destiny 2 as an example, since I play it a lot. You have 4 seasons each year, each with weekly story and challenges that keep you up to date and logged in from time in and time out. You have rewards to chase like new weapons, gear, exotics, and more that keep you playing. When done properly, these games can sustain huge communities and provide constant stream of entertainment for many that keeps them hooked to the game. But when done incorrectly, the results can be catastrophic, and unfortunately 2042 is sort of edging near the latter. Now, I will say that at the game's launch, DICE was rather quick, and the rollout of hotfixes and patches for the state of the game was at a rate not seen before in previous games, and it was actually great seeing them roll out fixes so quickly compared to previous titles. However, as a result of the game being so broken and fundamentally flawed even after a lot of the patches, DICE have to push the start of Season 1 to summer of 2022. That was 7 to 8 months after the game's launch and about 5 to 6 months past the initial start date in January. This is a massive red flag that basically resulted in an extremely dead period of absolutely nothing interesting going on within the game until June, while gameplay issues and bugs were being addressed and ironed out. Even though we had trinkles of content in the form of weekly challenges for free cosmetic, there wasn't really enough there for the community to really feast their hands on and while they wait for Season 1. I mean, can we even call this new content? The long delay, in my opinion, is unacceptable when there's also nothing to buffer that delay. I believe that there should have been a balance between regularly releasing new content alongside fixing core issues with the game. You can have both, as other games have done before. Having no new content for that long when the game already is in a catastrophic state meant that it was way easier for players to just hop off the game and just forget about it and not come back, which entirely kills the player base of this game much faster than others. There was also controversy between developers and community fighting over the state of the game. I mean, lots of memes came out of this, I will say that. Terms from developers and higher ups such as the game is being ahead of schedule, having brutal expectations, and more were taken out of context to express frustration, albeit with a more light-hearted tone nowadays. While I think these memes have been oversaturated at this point, they're honestly somewhat harmless so long as people were not overly harassing developers, which surprisingly I didn't see as much compared to other games. One piece by the devs that keeps standing out to me specifically is exactly how many people are still working on this game. DICE has come to clarify that almost everyone is on deck for 2042, but with the release of Season 1 along with preseason patch rollouts, a lot of the community rightfully have their doubts. It's completely understandable though that not everyone can focus on a specific area on the game like new content. I mean, that's how game development works. You split your resources to work on different areas of the game. However, when Season 1 rolled around and revealed that there was only one map that we've seen before in a lot of leaks, 2 guns and 1 rework, I can't help but feel a little skeptical in their claims. I think we won't see the results of that shift in focus until later seasons, but for now the rollout is very slow, especially from a AAA developer. Now the new content actually available is actually fine in my opinion. Exposure is one of the best and most classic Battlefield maps this game has seen, and the rework to Kaleidoscope was a welcome addition and it fixed a good amount of issues with the map, albeit not all of them. The new weapons were also great fun to play around and use. The BSVM was overpowered as shit, and the crossbow is a lot of fun and surprisingly effective to use in the right hands. Now, these have their balancing issues, but that's to be expected. Oh, also forgot to mention this in the script, but the new stealth chopper is pretty good, definitely needs a massive balancing patch, and they have done it, which is good, but definitely needs some more. The amount of versatility in that vehicle is bananas. Oh yeah, and then the battle pass thing's pretty decent as well, even though they're mainly cosmetics, but they're alright. However, with the lack of available content in the game, keep in mind this game really only had 22 base game weapons and 7 base maps. It's simply not enough for a majority of the community's eyes. Now, unfortunately, I don't expect much to change in future seasons, as it literally was confirmed like just now that we were only getting 1 new map in Season 2. DICE overall has completely flunked the live service model of this game in my opinion, which, while I think it's good that they're sticking with 2042, it's pretty insulting, especially for players who had to pay over $60 for the game to get deluxe editions for the season passes. The game honestly should not have to delay the content so late in the cycle to roll out, and while I do understand that developers most likely had to go back to the drawing board to rework a lot of the game's core features, having a delay this long destroyed basically all momentum players had for hype and hope of this game. The story of Battlefield 2042 is a very strange game, to be honest. It's a game that saw hype fly so far into the atmosphere akin to Battlefield 1 a couple years ago, but flopped so hard in so many people's eyes and is trying so very hard to win everyone back, but with its core gameplay systematically flawed to many that a rework is necessary to regain that Battlefield magic. Like, we are talking Final Fantasy XIV or Diablo 3 rework levels. The game will almost never recover to a state that, in my opinion, will be considered a great game in the franchise. Now, there are also suggestions that this game was initially intended to be a strictly Battle Royale game, but then reworked into a notable Battlefield title, which could explain a lot of the decisions here in the game, from the specialist akin almost to Apex Legends, to the sparse amount of weapons in the base game, to the extremely open level design. While the evidence surely is damning here, it's only a part of the issues of this game in my opinion. Development cycle aside, in my opinion, 2042's potential autopsy can be attributed to its masking of its true self in a way, trying so hard to make players remember the good old times even though it was not, trying so hard to capture the greatest parts of previous games without understanding why the greatest parts of previous games worked so well in the first place. Now, I just want to throw this out here. I'm not a Battlefield vet, as the old peeps say. My first ever Battlefield game was Battlefield 3, which just turned 10 last year. However, I can always look at the community's response in perspective, as they are an extremely vocal one, and somewhat assess why players think the way they do for this game.
with a lot of people probably having way more played hours than I do in not only 2042 but in previous games, and make conclusions on different areas that made a game successful or a failure to them. I wish I could look more into a developer perspective in the future, as I think it would be a more interesting video to make. Now, despite my issues and core problems with the game, I still have fun playing this game sometimes. The game overall plays more like a pseudo more arcadey style Modern Warfare's Ground War, and when you turn your brain off, it's perfectly fine and just dumb fun, which is currently serving an itch for me until Modern Warfare 2 comes out. However, I can't help but look at what this game could be. So much wasted potential here. Now, do I recommend playing this game? If you like to turn your brain off, sure. But otherwise, this game really tried so many different things, and while it was okay at some things, it was great at absolutely nothing.
Anyways, that's going to be it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, leave a like. If not, dislike it. This is the first time I've really done a documentary-esque kind of video in a while, so hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I hope to make more of these once some more inspiration comes in. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you guys later.